So we're going to be doing something slightly different this week. We are going to be, we'll see what we're going to be doing. We're going to be comparing versions of a story today. We're going to identify the features of a traditional story, read and listen to two versions, and identify similarities and differences. So what are traditional stories and fairy stories? Something that you've all come across at some point. So just have a little think. Think about what traditional stories or fairy stories you can name. Let's pause the video and have a little think, see how many you can get. Okay, here are some that I remembered. I'm sure there are lots more. I came up with The Three Little Pigs. It's a very famous one. I'm sure you all know that story. Red Riding Hood, another very famous fairy story. Hansel and Gretel, quite a scary one, but certainly a famous one. Rumpelstiltskin, again pretty creepy to be honest, but nonetheless that is a fairy story. The Three Billy Goats Gruff, which I'd forgotten all about, but I was kind of reminded of when we talked about the Trolls Bridge the other week. Goldilocks and the Three Bears, certainly a very famous one. Jack and the Beanstalk, and Snow White. So as I say, there are lots and lots of others, but these are the sort of the most famous ones. And a lot of these stories actually come from Germany. They're really old stories. And the versions that we know about were kind of first written down by a couple of brothers called the Brothers Grimm in the 19th century, I think. And then obviously Disney made films of a lot of these as well. And the versions that we are familiar with are not always the same as the originals. The originals were a lot scarier, a lot darker. Some might say a lot better. Didn't always have a happy ending. But there are versions that we know, which is probably what we'll be best thinking about this week. So we're going to listen to a fairy story. This one, I think, was written by a guy called Hans Christian Andersen, but I'm not sure. Okay. Once upon a time, down on an old farm, lived a duck family. And Mother Duck had been sitting on a clutch of new eggs. One nice morning, the eggs hatched and out popped 6 chirpy ducklings. But one egg was bigger than the rest and didn't hatch. Mother Duck couldn't recall laying that 7th egg. How did it get there? Tock, tock, the little prisoner was pecking inside his shell. Did I count the eggs wrongly? Mother Duck wondered. But before she had time to think about it, the last egg finally hatched. A strange-looking duckling with grey feathers that should have been yellow gazed at a worried mother. The ducklings grew quickly, but Mother Duck had a secret worry. I can't understand how this ugly duckling can be one of mine, she said to herself, shaking her head as she looked at her last-born. Well, the grey duckling certainly wasn't pretty, and since he ate much more than his brothers, he was outgrowing them. As the days went by, the poor ugly duckling became more and more unhappy. His brothers didn't want to play with him. He was so clumsy, and all the farmyard folks simply laughed at him. He felt sad and lonely, while Mother Duck did her best to console him. Poor little ugly duckling, she would say, why are you so different from the others? And the ugly duckling felt worse than ever. He secretly wept at night. He felt nobody wanted him. Nobody loves me. They all tease me. Why am I different from my brothers? Then, one day at sunrise, he ran away from the farmyard. He stopped at a pond and began to question all the other birds. Do you know any ducklings with grey feathers like mine? But everyone shook their heads in scorn. We don't know anyone as ugly as you. The ugly duckling did not lose heart, however, and kept on making inquiries. He went to another pond, where a pair of large geese gave him the same answer to his question. What's more, they warned him. Don't stay here. Go away. It's dangerous. There are men with guns round here. The duckling was sorry he had ever left the farmyard. Then, one day, his travels took him near an old countrywoman's cottage. Thinking he was a stray goose, she caught him. I'll put this in a hutch. I hope it's a female and lays plenty of eggs, said the old woman, whose eyesight was poor. But the ugly duckling laid not a single egg. The hen kept frightening him. Just wait. If you don't lay eggs, the old woman will wring your neck and pop you into the pot. And the cat chipped in, Hee hee, I hope the woman cooks you, then I can gnaw at your bones. The poor ugly duckling was so scared that he lost his appetite, though the old woman kept stuffing him with food and grumbling, If you won't lay eggs, at least hurry up and get plump. Oh dear me, moaned the now terrified duckling. I'll die of fright first, and I did so hope someone would love me. Then, one night, finding the hutch door ajar, he escaped. Once again he was all alone. He fled as far away as he could, and at dawn he found himself in a thick bed of reeds. If nobody wants me, I'll hide here forever. There was plenty of food, and the duckling began to feel a little happier, though he was lonely. One day at sunrise he saw a flight of beautiful birds wing overhead, white, with long slender necks, yellow beaks and large wings. They were migrating south. If only I could look like them, just for a day, said the duckling admiringly. Winter came and the water in the reed bed froze. The poor duckling left home to seek food in the snow. He dropped, exhausted, to the ground, but a farmer found him and put him in his big jacket pocket. I'll take him home to my children. They'll look after him. Poor thing, he's frozen. The duckling was showered with kindly care at the farmer's house. In this way, the ugly duckling was able to survive the bitterly cold winter. However, by springtime he had grown so big that the farmer decided, I'll set him free by the pond. That was when the duckling saw himself mirrored in the water. Goodness, how I've changed! I hardly recognize myself. The flight of swans winged north again and glided on to the pond. When the duckling saw them, he realized he was one of their kind, and soon they made friends. We're swans like you, they said warmly. Where have you been hiding? It's a long story, replied the young swan, still astounded. Now he swam majestically with his fellow swans. One day he heard children on the riverbank exclaim, Look at that young swan! He's the finest of them all! And he almost burst with happiness. The end. Right. How would you summarize that story? Just maybe pause the video and write down 4 or 5 basic points that tell that whole story of the ugly duckling. Okay, this is what I came up with. A duckling is born from a mystery egg. He is different to the other ducklings. He runs away and gets in trouble. A farmer finds him and cares for him. He grows up to be a beautiful swan. So that's the basic story of the ugly duckling in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. Pretty simple, but with all that description and that dialogue and all those sort of writing features in there, it turns into quite an interesting story, quite a famous story. Right, we're going to listen to another version of this story. It comes from this book. What do you think it will be like? The story is called The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales. That should give you a clue. Is this story going to be the same? Is it different? How will it be different? Have a little think and then listen to the story. The Really Ugly Duckling. Once upon a time, there was a mother duck and a father duck who had 7 baby ducklings. 6 of them were regular-looking ducklings. The 7th was a really ugly duckling. Everyone used to say, "What a nice-looking bunch of ducklings," all except that one. "Boy, he's really ugly." The really ugly duckling heard these people, but he didn't care. He knew that one day he would probably grow up to be a swan and be bigger and look better than anything in the pond. Well, as it turned out, he was just a really ugly duckling, and he grew up to just be a really ugly duck. The end. Right. What were the similarities and differences between the two stories? There were some things that were the same in both, and there were definitely some things that were different. In your books, draw a table like this and write down as many similarities as you can between the stories and as many differences. I don't think it'll be a very long list, but there are quite a few things that you can put on there. When you've done that, we'll listen to some other versions of stories from the Stinky Cheese Man. First of all, you need to figure out what the original story was, try and remember that, and then listen out for the similarities and differences between the original story and the versions in this book. The Princess and the Bowling Ball. Once upon a time there was a prince, and this prince's dad and mum, the king and queen, somehow got it into their royal heads that no princess would be good enough for their boy unless she could feel a pea through 100 mattresses. So it should come as no surprise that the prince had a very hard time finding a princess. Every time he met a nice girl, his mum and dad would pile 100 mattresses on top of a pea and then invite her to sleep over. When the princess came down for breakfast, the queen would ask, "How did you sleep, dear?" And the princess would politely say, "Fine, thank you." And the king would show her the door. Now this went on for 3 years. And of course, nobody ever felt the pea under 100 mattresses. Then, one day, the prince met the girl of his dreams. He decided he had better do something about it. That night, before the princess went to bed, the prince slipped his bowling ball under the 100 mattresses. When the princess came down for breakfast the next morning, the queen asked, "How did you sleep, dear?" "This might sound odd," said the princess, "but I think you need another mattress. I felt like I was sleeping on a lump as big as a bowling ball." The king and queen were satisfied. The prince and princess were married, and everyone lived happily, though maybe not completely honestly, ever after. The end. The Other Frog Prince. Once upon a time, there was a frog. One day, when he was sitting on his lily pad, he saw a beautiful princess sitting by the pond. He hopped in the water, swam over to her, and poked his head out of the weeds. "Pardon me, oh beautiful princess," he said in his most sad and pathetic voice. "I wonder if you could help me." The princess was about to jump up and run, but she felt sorry for the frog with the sad and pathetic voice. So she asked, "What can I do to help you, little frog?" "Well," said the frog, "I'm not really a frog, but a handsome prince who was turned into a frog by a wicked witch's spell. And the spell can only be broken by the kiss of a beautiful princess." The princess thought about this for a second, then lifted the frog from the pond and kissed him. "I was just kidding," said the frog. He jumped back in the pond, and the princess wiped the frog's slime off her lips. The end. So this week you are going to be writing your own version of a traditional story. Obviously, thinking about what we read in The Stinky Cheese Man, we're going to try and change it a bit, maybe make the ending different, maybe switch round who's good and who's bad, set it in a different place, maybe mix together 2 different fairy stories or even more. You can really do what you want. There needs to be some things in there that we recognise, but it does need to be different from the original story. So before the next lesson, have a think about the story that you're going to work on and how you're going to change it. Bye.